Welcome to Season 5 of the Life Giver Podcast, a place for honest conversation and hope that will breathe life back into your military or first responder marriage. This is your host, Corey Weathers. I'm a military spouse, clinician, and advocate, and I'm bringing topics that I hear from the service community and counseling room to the podcast, where we can face the challenges of this lifestyle together. Welcome to Season 5 of the Life Giver Podcast. This is your host, Corey Weathers, and I have with me Dr. Becky Porter from Military Child Education Coalition. She is the CEO and president, and I've been thinking about highlighting this amazing resource on the podcast for some time now because, number one, as a military family, we have so much benefited from what MCEC has provided, and I hope to share a little bit more about that in the episode. But I just knew there's so many families out there that are parenting military kids and trying to navigate, especially with all the relocations, how to raise amazing military kids and launch them successfully. And I have just bumped into MCEC several times in several different locations and have been thrilled with what they're providing. So I'm thrilled to have Dr. Becky Porter on the podcast for this season to share with you guys a little bit more about what they're doing, what they can offer, and really how they can raise your confidence as a parent that you can actually successfully raise and launch your military kids in a way that they will feel not only educated, but supported. So Dr. Porter, thank you so much for joining me. I'm really looking forward to talk to you.
Thank you, Corey. Thanks for having me. And I have to tell you, I really appreciate the interest that you've shown in MCEC and the confidence that you have in what we can provide for military kids.
Well, I am a parent of teenagers now, and I will be honest, I'll just speak for myself. You know, being a parent is hard enough, and being in the military and constantly relocating, and I'm very public with the fact that our family in particular has relocated more frequently than most families, or at a tempo that has been a little bit very rapid. So about every year and a half on average is what we have moved. And so as a parent, it's hard enough to do that, but to try to help your kids through all these relocations and moves and all the emotions and working with the school system, my kids go to the public school system. And so, and now we are a newly EFMP family. There's just so many variables that make it more challenging to really try to raise and launch these great kids. And so, I'm so thankful that someone, maybe you can kind of share a little bit of the background of MCEC, but someone had the passion and desire to say, we need something for our military kids and their parents, and maybe even for the teachers as well. So I guess to start, you have recently taken on the role as the CEO for MCEC, but could you maybe go back just a little bit and maybe share a little bit about what MCEC is and maybe just kind of a real high level storyline of how MCEC came to be?
Sure, I'd be happy to do that. Well, MCEC, or the Military Child Education Coalition, has actually been around for about 22 years. And we're headquartered in Harker Heights, Texas, which is right outside of Fort Hood. And the reason that we are headquartered there is that that's where we started. And it was a group of caring parents and Army leaders and an assistant superintendent from the Killeen Independent School District sitting around a table one evening talking about some of the challenges that Milkids have, particularly when their parents have to relocate. And so this group of folks decided that they wanted to form a nonprofit to help military children, and especially around their education needs. And so they started it, and the original CEO and founding CEO was Dr. Mary Keller, who was the assistant superintendent at Killeen Independent School District at the time. And she and some other caring individuals just decided, I think they opened up their wallets right then and put $40 on the table, and that was how they started. And since that time, then it's broadened to serve way more than just Army kids, and way more than just those at Fort Hood. It's a global organization. We have folks all over the country, and we serve children all over the world. We have Well, let me tell you, you asked a little bit about how I got involved. So back in 2001, I was on active duty in the Army and worked in the office of the Chief of Staff of the Army at the Pentagon. And one of the things that I was responsible for was family programs and education. And so as part of my duties, I was asked to help coordinate the chief's remarks for the what's now known as the National Training Seminar that MCEC holds annually, so that he could participate in this meeting and make remarks to the audience. And so I started working with them, and then 2 years later, after I didn't even work for him anymore, I stayed involved with the organization because I just really felt passionate about what they did and what they continue to do. Back in 2001, we were just publishing what I consider to be a seminal research project called the Secondary Education Transition Study, or SETS. And that was the first kind of it was qualitative research around what military kids experience when they go from school to school. And so we actually we did interviews and collected information and then analyzed that information to see what do military kids experience from transitioning their credits, moving credits from one high school to another. What's it like for them to try to show up at the school after they've already had tryouts for football team or cheerleading for the season, and or even music tryouts. And so we found out about that. We also found out that there are, not surprisingly, a lot of social concerns for kids when they come into a new school, and even something down to who do I sit with at lunch on my first day was something that really concerned those kids. And so we set about to work with different school systems, especially those that had a lot of military kids coming in and out. And we helped them come to a memorandum of agreement there was an original 9 schools that did this. And that was a precursor to what's known as MCEC now, which is it's an interstate compact that's completely outside of MCEC's. We don't control it at all, but it's grown a life of its own and is a completely separate regulatory requirement for schools to work with military kids. So that was how I originally got involved, was as a proofreader for the Secondary Education Transition Study. And then I later was a trainer for some of them at different events, did presentations, and eventually was on their science advisory board. My background is in clinical psychology, and so they really needed me to wrangle the other scientists. And so that's how I got involved with MCEC and how I stayed involved with MCEC. And Mary Keller, like I said, the founder, only retired in September. And so I've retired from the Army and now serve as the president and CEO.
Well, first of all, I just want to say thank you for how hard you worked in the military and for serving yourself. But I'm so thankful that your paths crossed with something that you became so passionate about, and that really aligns with your skill set too, with having that background of psychology. And in a very small way, I feel like that is how my introduction to MCEC came about too, in just that I just happened to come across it. In fact, we were actually stationed at Fort Leavenworth for ILE for the CGSE course. And that's actually where I came across MCEC for the first time. I was brought out here in 2015 to actually speak to the spouses whose soldiers were going through the CGSC course. And there happened to be somebody from MCEC that was presenting a workshop on, it was specifically on how we as parents could create a portfolio for our kids so that as we transition and as we move from school to school, just like we have a PCS binder, that we could have a portfolio binder for the kids as well to hold everything that we could possibly need to help them transition better. And I'll be honest, that was the first time anybody had ever ever mentioned that to me. And it was just like, I cannot believe I had not thought about creating a portfolio. But even bigger than that, for somebody to walk me through how to organize that portfolio, what's best to keep in that portfolio. And that was the first time I heard about that, that compact of being able to take that letter to a school that says, hey, I need you. It was little things like, I didn't know until that workshop that if your child had received, let's say, gifted services in a school before that you could now go to the next school and say, until they're tested, we should be able to accept this child into that program. Probably very similar to all the other activities, the social activities, that, just to give them that kind of transition in. And then if you need to further evaluate them according to your state standards, that's a whole different thing. Yeah. So it just opened my eyes to so many things in that workshop. And I thought, oh my goodness, how had I not come across this nonprofit before? Especially considering my kids are late in elementary school, it could have been so much easier for me if I would have known about it in advance. Yeah. So, and since then I have, of course, now I know the logo and I see them, and I see them coming into the schools and doing workshops for the kids, workshops for the parents. And it's just been so wonderful ever since then to see you guys popping up all over the place and really serving our community in a beautiful way. And it just makes me smile every time I see you guys. So I would love for maybe you to share a little bit. Again, you're doing so much. It's hard we wouldn't have the time to really dive into the details of so many things, but if you could just break down the organization of MCEC and what people could understand as far as what you provide and who you provide services to, that might be a great way to start. So I know for sure you do things for students, for parents, and professionals. So could you maybe break down just a little bit of what you provide?
Sure. And that's actually a good way to think about it is students, parents, and professionals. And those are kind of three of our main lines of effort. And then a fourth one is related to those, and that's military student transitions. So we have actual training and professionals who provide like a concierge service for transitioning students and facilitating transitions. But I'll start with the student programs. We have our original student program is called Student to Student, or S2S, and that was designed for originally for high school students. And you can think of it sort of as a club, but it's a lot more than a club. It has a curriculum and core values, and it's designed to teach kids that are members of the club leadership, inclusivity, and also to provide a landing spot for kids coming into a new school. The thing about S2S that a lot of people don't realize is that it's open to all students. It's not just military students. So, and that goes back to our core value of inclusivity, but it's also a way for military connected kids to kind of share their experiences with their civilian counterparts and civilian peers in a way that I think helps the rest of the country understand what it's like to be in the military and what some of the benefits and challenges can be. So we have, and those are led by what we call a sponsor, who is somebody who's on faculty or staff at a high school. And those programs are eligible for the kids can be nominated for a leadership program that we have called the Francis Hesselbein Leadership Program. And that is a kind of a week-long seminar that's held twice a year, once at the Air Force Academy and once at the Military Academy at West Point. And the kids go there and they learn even more in-depth leadership tenets from the faculty and the cadets at those two institutions, and then take those back to their schools. They're really, we found from the feedback that those are really enriching experiences for our S2S kids. And then for the junior high level, there's JS2S, similarly led by a sponsor, an adult sponsor at the So I say led by that, the sponsor kind of oversees it, but in both the JS2S and the S2S, the goal is to have the students lead it and to be the ones that set the agenda and ensure that the curriculum is followed and presented in an entertaining way or an engaging way, I should say, for their fellow students. And then there is also ES2S, which is the elementary student to student program. And that one really is led by a teacher or staff member at the elementary level. But it's just to introduce those youngsters to some of the same tenets, some of the same core values, and to get them engaged in learning about leadership at a very early age. But those all came into existence because of a need that we observed in that secondary education transition study, and then a follow-up that we did several years later that told us that really those first 2 weeks that a military kid gets into their new school are so crucial, almost fragile for them to have somebody that they can connect with, someone that they know they're going to sit with at lunch. That's an incredibly stressful period, is who do I sit with at lunch when I'm new? And so that's how those started, those student programs. And then we also have, like you mentioned, the parent programs. And those are called parent to parent because all of our trainers in that program are actually military parents. And there's a requirement that before they're hired, that they had to have gone through some PCS moves to know what it's like to try to shepherd their military child into a new school. And so they provide those trainings to parents at their location, or sometimes they travel to that location. And they have a whole slew of trainings that they can do. And you mentioned some of them, like helping to prepare for college or building a portfolio for your student, right down to the recommendation to take pictures of the front of their textbooks so that when you get to the next school and they say, well, what text were they using? You can say, oh, this is the one that they used, because it makes a difference in the world of education. And another thing that we do in the parent to parent is educate the parents on, it's kind of like an expectation management. So helping them learn that education is a local issue. It's not something that is typically federally regulated, although there are some federal regulations that apply, but really what you get at one school could be dramatically different from what you get at the next school. And it doesn't mean that they're negligent in their responsibilities or that the last school was negligent. It's just different. There are different ways of scheduling courses, different ways of sequencing things like math. And so we help the parents learn about that. But we also do things, we have podcasts and webinars on things like the importance of sleep and how can you help your teenager get the right kind of sleep to enhance and leverage the best education experience for them. Let's see. So that's kind of the parent to parent. And that's a program. Sometimes it's referred to as P2P. And then finally, we have a professional development program, and that is for the educators and the staff in the schools. And in our professional development, we provide them with similar content, but from the perspective of an educator. So how can you, as a school counselor, help a military child or a new child transition into your school system from another one? Or if you are sending a child to a new school, what are some things you can help the family do to prepare for that? And you mentioned EFMP, and we've really, in the last few months, seen an increased interest from families on making sure that their EFMP and children with special needs are getting their education needs met in the way that they should be legally, and then just from an opportunity standpoint. And so we do podcasts on IEPs and 504, and how do you transition your child's program from one school to another. And actually, we've had meetings with school superintendents to see, how can we better educate parents to be able to move as seamlessly as possible into that new school setting, especially when they have a child who has special needs.
So much. And I will be honest, I love the podcasts. I have benefited so much from it's just calmed me as a parent, especially of teenagers, to listen to podcasts where you guys have even interviewed some of the high school kids or military kids to get that kind of feedback and share from their perspective, a personal perspective of what it's like to be a military kid. So many great resources and advice along the way that I can't tell you just how appreciative I've been of that podcast. And so much knowledge to be able to pull from. I'm just going to really just encourage everybody listening. I know we have a lot of first responder families that listen to this podcast as well. And so I just want to kind of caveat here that I know that this specific episode really speaks to a lot of our active duty, maybe some of our National Guard as well. But like she said, there's a lot of great resources for all the kids. And so I think that there's plenty that even first responder families can look into what MCEC is doing and benefit from. I mean, I can't tell you just how helpful it is to be able to go to the school or have a meeting or go and meet next year's, teacher and be able to have that portfolio to be able to say, here's some of his best work from last year. Here's maybe how he learns best, or really just kind of giving me the confidence to be able to speak with a teacher and advocate for my child when I need to. And that's been honestly the best thing that I have learned from my mentors, other military spouses that have mentored me as a parent and as a mom. And also MCEC too is empowering me to advocate for my child. I think originally, when you're young and you have these, babies, these little people, and it's time to, especially take them to public school. And, there is that feeling of relief, like someone else's responsibility because I am not talented to do this,
Right.
Which I'm so thankful for because I am talented in educating adults. And it's just not the calling on my life to homeschool my kids, although we've had to think about it with the tempo that we have had. But I think early on, I thought and assumed that, and this is my fault, and I'll be vulnerable and say that I assumed that all the educators would fully understand my child, have the time to really fully understand my child and be able to provide the best education possible. And I think it was the desire of their heart to provide the best education possible. And that I needed to learn how to be graceful instead of storming the castle and just, ripping the school system apart for something that they may have been doing the best that they could. But I think it took me a while to realize that I can and should be the advocate for my child. And that if I can just be graceful with those that I'm working with, that we all wish to work together. I'm sure you hear that all the time from your professionals, that we all wish to work together, but we sometimes have to bring all the right information to the table.
Yeah, absolutely, Corey. And I think that's a real good point about bringing the right information to the table. And that's something that those parent-to-parent seminars and trainings can provide, as well as the professional development, so that there's the right information on both sides of that equation. I wanted to go back just for a second to the first responders and how what MCEC does and what we've learned can really apply to their situation. A lot of what we've seen in the last 15 years and what we've done in the last 15 years was for military children around the issues of deployment, PTSD, traumatic brain injury, and how all of those, the separations, the anxiety that goes with having a parent in danger, it really can impact a child's ability to receive their education. And so to that point, I think that first responders are really in a very, very similar boat to active duty, Guard, and Reserve. And so and then where they parallel kind of to the Guard and Reserve is that they may not be around a big installation where somebody knows what they do, what the parent does for a living. And so the educators might not key into the fact that, for example, Johnny's dad was in a huge fire, fighting a huge fire last night, or had to respond to a horrible traffic accident, and what that can do to a home life. And so in that sense, I think a lot of what we've learned from the last 15 or more years of war and how that impacts our children can be applied also to the children of first responders, if that makes sense.
Oh, I'm so glad that you said that, and that so many of those resources, those emotional resources, the social support that those kids need, and the support that the parents need too. I'm sure there's so much that MCEC has, even on their website or in the podcast, that arm you as a parent with the right words, even to be able to go to the school and articulate what it is that your family is going through, to have successful conversations. Because I think at the end of the day, that's what this is about, right? It's about how does everybody work together, communicate well, and understand both sides. I don't think it's ever effective. I've been that parent who has been so stressed because of my own life and the military lifestyle, who's also combined that with my worry of my child, or the stress that they're under, that I have not communicated well with the school, whether that was out of frustration or out of fear even, or just whatever those emotions were, that I didn't communicate well. And I think there's also been times at the school, because of the pressures that they're under, didn't communicate well either. So I think it's so valuable to have resources that give you the right words, that give you the right tools, that even cast perspective on the fact that we're all in this together. We all have a common goal, that these kids do great. And so if we can do that together and actually communicate at the table better, then I'm all for that.
Are you hearing something today that's really hitting home? Take your personal growth to the next level by joining the Life Giver Facebook group. Simply head over to the Facebook page, Corey Weathers/Lifegiver, and join the group with other service couples for support and deeper discussions on each episode. Want even more? Subscribe to the Life Giver newsletter for practical tips from each episode and exclusive discounts on sessions with Corey.
I know a couple of the things that your workshop a couple of things that stood out to me in the workshop, besides the portfolio, was it was the first time that I had ever heard someone say that when military kids specifically are moving from school to school, that there's even a lot of kids are showing there's chunks of information that they are missing, especially if you're moving in the middle of the year. And I had never thought about that before. So I remember the workshop, the woman that was leading the workshop, I remember her telling a story about how one of the military kids that she came across, it was small information. It's just it makes you just kind of think. It's nothing that was like crucial to the building blocks of their education, but it's small things like you miss that one segment of, red and blue make purple, or, a young child who maybe misses if they move mid-year, they miss that information of what's the order of the months of the year because they moved, and perhaps that teacher was saving that for second semester. And then you get to the next school and that teacher in second semester covered it in the first semester. So they're missing these little tidbits of information. And that opened up my eyes as a parent to realize, kind of the costs associated with relocating and moving mid-year, and helped me advocate a little bit more. I love your idea about taking a picture of the textbook. I think that would be so helpful for situations like this to know, like, what was the curriculum that they were using and where did they get to in that curriculum? And then being able to advocate in case there is information missing that we might need to supplement with tutoring. We might need to supplement with extra time with the teacher, or even just have more patience as a family while that child catches up.
Right. And thinking about how to reassure the child that it's not a deficit on their part, that they don't have the information that the other kids seem to have. When you were talking about that, I wasn't in a military family growing up, but I've thought, but I did move several times, and I somehow missed the instruction on the state capitals. And I've always noticed that when people start talking about the state capitals, it's like, okay, yeah, I can look those up, but I don't ever remember anyone teaching me about that. Now, on the other side, though, a lot of military kids will, especially when they get into junior high and high school, they might get state history for every single state that their parents are assigned.
I was
in.
actually going to bring this up. This is just a common conversation that we have a lot in our own household. And my kids actually brought this up. They were like, why do I have to learn about Virginia when I'm going to leave Virginia and I'm going to go to the next state and they're going to make me learn about Georgia in the next state? And before you continue, I just want to say I had this major aha when my kids brought this up. And he actually said to me, he goes, I understand that it's important to understand the history of each state, but he goes, do they not understand that the world is so much bigger than the state that they live in? And it really woke my eyes up to how big our military kids see the world because they've lived in more than one state.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. In fact, my daughter, when she got married, so I have two military kids. One is 28 and the other one's 25. And the 28-year-old, when she got married, and of course we had moved all around, but she and her husband moved to another state, and she wanted to get a new driver's license with her new married name on it. And when she went to the place, and they said, well, do you have your birth certificate? And she did. And they said, well, why is your driver's license from Virginia, but you were born in the state of Washington? And she said, I've moved since I was born. And the rural community where she had moved to, that was kind of an unusual concept for them. And so, but military kids take that for granted. And they take for granted, I think, going to some of the advantages of being a military child is that many of them can walk into a room full of strangers and find something to talk about, and can move through the world with a certain level of ease, at least outwardly, that some of their civilian counterparts might envy. And so it's not all bad news for military kids, and they do tend to rise to the challenge and then thrive, I think. But what MCEC tries to do is make sure that they are able at every stop along the way to take the best advantage of the education opportunities that are in front of them.
Dr. Porter, interesting after you were saying that can actually be turned as a strength. I think it's hard for us as military parents. I'll just speak for myself again. I know it's been a huge burden on my heart, making sure that the kids are okay. And that, I love to talk with mentors like you who have successfully launched their kids. And every time somebody says something like, I have a 28-year-old and they just got married, I'm like, so it's possible. They do launch and they are okay. I'm so thankful for that mentoring. But we worry so much about our kids, and we worry about, are they moving too much, and is it too much of a burden on them? And, are we going to deal with a lot of psychological issues at some point? And I was actually at the kids' school, it was the elementary school, and MCEC was actually doing an event for Military Child Day. And I was so thankful to see them there and see them involved and playing a part in what the school, it was one of those great schools that was really tracking the military kids coming in, making sure that they have those military kid appreciation days, and really tying in MCEC and the resources and the people that they have to be able to offer that level of support. And so I was at a table with some young elementary school military kids, and I think I was passing out cupcakes, and I was just trying to start up a conversation with the kids. And so I asked them how long they had been living here, had they recently moved here, and where did they move from? And they went around the table, and one kid was saying, well, I just got here from Japan, and I've spent some time in Germany. And somebody else said, well, I just moved here from Virginia. And it got to this one little girl, and she started to cry. And I just weep at the table. And I was like, oh no, like what's going on? I thought maybe is her dad deployed, or is there something significant that's going on in her life? So I knelt down beside her and I tried to calm her down. And I asked her, what's going on? What's bringing tears to your eyes? And she goes, I've never gotten to live somewhere cool like that.
Oh,
so here we were at a table where I would think as a parent, it would be a stressor that they've moved in all these places and gone to all these places, but it actually was something that another military kid wished that they would have had more often in their life. And so I think we just never, we can never anticipate what actually can become a strength if we just kind of flip the perspective and really help our kids and ourselves, I think, too, see the strength and the positivity of what it actually can do in our lives and how it can actually build those leadership characteristics like you've been talking about.
Absolutely. And if I could, some of the stressors that we're seeing with kids are not as much, I mean, they're still transition and moving is a significant one, but we're also seeing some separation that might not be due to deployment. For example, if a service member gets assigned in a location where either they know that the service member will only be there for a year, and so they don't want to relocate the entire family, like when you went to Leavenworth, or if it's a situation where the family doesn't feel comfortable with either the schools that are available, or they don't want to disrupt the school that they're currently in, the family will choose of their own volition to separate, for that time period or that assignment. And that introduces a whole nother set of stressors for the family. It's like, reintegration is difficult anyway after a deployment. But if you're doing it like every week or every couple of weeks, where you're bringing the family member who's remote back into the family, that's a stressor too. And so we're trying to look at those kinds of issues and how we can help address those as well as the transition. In fact, one of the things that we're doing is to launch a survey just to make sure that we've really been based on evidence and informed by evidence since our beginning in the early 2000s. And what we want to do right now is kind of check the pulse of our stakeholders, whether they be educators, whether they be parents, and even some high school level students. We're sending out a survey in February. It'll be from February to mid-March, or mid-April, actually. And just to kind of check the pulse and see what are your current needs, what are the things that we can help you with, because we want to be able to continue to be relevant and helpful the way that you found the organization to be.
Well, I love the fact that you guys are tracking geobatching. It's kids and kids education is one of the top reasons that families are geobatching. It's a huge stressor on the family, especially if they're dealing with EFMP issues, those 504s or IEPs that are difficult to transition. Or if they, or maybe they can transition their education, but they can't find the medical care that they might need in that situation. And then, of course, we have a lot of the high school students who are trying to finish up in one state or meet criteria in a state. I think I'm just now learning that we can move to another state, but still get a diploma and meet qualifications in a previous state. So we don't have to keep starting over. That's one of those things that I will be looking into here very soon and what MCEC is able to provide as far as support for our family. So there can be a lot of reasons why a lot of families are choosing to geo-batch. And that's one of those things that I really try to discourage if possible, unless there is a financial crisis, a medical crisis, or understandably, we're talking about graduation, because it can be very stressful for a kid to really pour themselves into electives or into classes and really work hard in those classes only to move and have those classes not accepted in the next state.
Right. Exactly. And to your point about the resources and being able to ask questions about that, you mentioned MCEC's website and that there is a lot of information there, but there's also on the website, there's a button called Ask Aunt Peggy. I don't know if you've ever noticed that on the website, but if you have a specific question that you don't see an answer to on our website, you can ask Aunt Peggy on there, and we put it in our staff and make sure that somebody gets back to the person to help them navigate whatever their individual situation is. That's not the main thing of what we do, but it is something that we provide, because I recognize that you can go on a website and not be able to find what you're looking for, or your situation doesn't seem to fit into, and actually none of our situations fit neatly into a box. And so that's what Ask Aunt Peggy is for.
Well, I love that. I'll probably be using that too. So if you see something coming in from the Weathers family, you'll know who it is. No, but I think that's so great because 22 years is such a long time to be able to have this amazing organization grow in credibility, but also in resources. And so when you get to that point where you're offering so many different resources to help a family, I notice on the mental health side that about the time that somebody's trying to reach out for help is usually about the time that they're in a point of desperation or frustration, and really struggle to find those resources. And so being able to have that kind of button or access to your staff to be able to, can you just point me where I need to go? Because I need to be able to have an answer to at least calm my own spirit so that I can handle this situation effectively. And I know that that's what your staff can do. Sometimes it's not about recreating a program, or it may not even be stuff that you guys haven't explored yet, although I'm sure you are able to gather some information on that. A lot of times it's just directing them to the right resource and tool in a very efficient way.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And we have partners that we work with in this space around family issues, around military family issues, and education issues. And so if we don't have the answer or the resources, we usually know somebody who can help.
Well, I'm so thankful for all the branches that you guys are working with. And I mean, like the parent, student, and professional branches, and the fact that you're backing this up with research, because that research is good for us as parents to know, as far as walking into, whether you're a kid walking into middle school or into high school, to be able to look into what you guys have found already and maybe be able to see some of those red flags early on if your child is beginning to struggle, and being able to know how to have the resources to take to a teacher if they are not quite keying in on some of those symptoms or issues that are going on is super helpful as well. I have definitely been to schools where they have been just ready to receive us as a military family with open arms, who have MCEC just walking the halls even, and invited to almost every event. And I can tell you, those have been the best places for our family, where I was able to get help with my kids quickly when they were starting to struggle, where I could reach out to them when I needed the support as well to help me navigate. This is the first time you've raised a human at 15 years old, right? So there's always something new to learn. And so I know when we were at Fort Jackson in South Carolina, for example, both the high school, middle school, and elementary schools all had MCEC parent-to-parent workshops being offered. They had military child appreciation days that were happening. I could go to any one of those MCEC representatives and ask for specific tools for my kid at that age. And it was and it was also a fantastic experience to walk into a new school with my portfolio ready. I think we as parents, when we do kind of get that advocacy bug, when we realize, okay, I guess I'm supposed to advocate for my child, it can be very easy to get to a place, unfortunately, where we feel like every school we go to, we have to start with a fight. And it doesn't have to be that. And so there have been times that I have walked into a school like at Fort Jackson on the northeast area of Columbia, and walked in, and they were already willing to receive me. They were already tracking all the important laws and regulations and even resources to help us jump in quickly. They had an ambassador ready for my student, just doing all the right things. And so I can't tell you what that does for a parent's heart to go, my kids are going to be okay. That's all we want, right? Is our kids, I'm trying not to cry, right? Our kids to be okay. And then I get to be able to do what I do best, because I can trust that they're okay. And then there's been other schools that have not quite had that set up. And that, since having my experience with MCEC, has given me the ability to not feel like I have to have all the answers to that school, because that's not my job. But I can advocate for my child and other students by going to that school and say, hey, here is this amazing resource, MCEC, that in previous schools has been wonderful. And so let's look into that together. Let's not reinvent the wheel if we don't have to, but let's see what we can do to partner so that other students coming in will feel supported and welcomed as well. Absolutely.
Absolutely. And that's a huge benefit to to us in the event that the school system is not familiar with what we can provide. And that's been something that's been really surprising to me over the years is, here's an organization that's been around for 22 years and can do such great work for military kids. And yet a lot of people haven't heard of it. And so spreading the word to educators as well as to parents, I think is really helpful to the kids.
Absolutely. And I just want to encourage, especially those that are listening that might be active duty, that are going to new installations, you probably are seeing opportunities for the parent-to-parent workshops or for the students. You just may not realize that it's MCEC that's running it. So when you see things like story time for your kids and activities going on in the local community, and they usually have a great relationship with the installations. And so being able to look at some of the activities that are happening in the area, and I highly encourage you to go to some of those events. They're well run and they're great and entertaining for the kids. I know one that we went to was at the Children's Museum in town and included story time and a place for the kids to play and interact in the museum. And so a lot of our families might be bumping into MCEC and just not realize that that's what that resource is about.
Yeah, and actually, that's one of the things that that I want to do, being new to the position and new to the organization from a leadership standpoint, is to get our name and our brand and our logo out there a little bit more prominently. Not because we want credit for anything, but because we want families and educators to be able to access our services.
Whatever I can do to help you guys do that, I'm all in, because I'm just so thankful for what you've done for our family. Dr. Porter, I think maybe to wrap up our time together, what I'd love to ask you, if you haven't said it already, I would love for you to maybe share, is there any resource in particular that you love or feel particularly affectionate about within MCEC? Is there one of your favorites? Or maybe a story that's one of your favorites as to why it's been such a passion for you to get involved and work with them now that you're supposedly retired?
Yeah, now that I'm retired. Right. I mean, it's hard. I don't want to pick a favorite, so to speak, because I hope that some of the staff is going to listen to this, and I don't want anybody to feel left out. But I think one of the there are two programs. One is the student to student, which is it's just so gratifying to see these young people who clearly have a bright future and are benefiting from not only from what we provide from a content and a curriculum standpoint, but also just their interactions with each other and the opportunities that they have through student to student. I mean, that's really heartwarming. The other very specific thing that our parent-to-parent program does is, and I think you made reference to it, is the Tell Me a Story. And Tell Me a Story is it's story time, but it's a very deliberate story time, and it's an opportunity for parents to sit with their child. Usually, a community leader will read a book to them, but the book is selected very, very deliberately for what it provides to the child in content, as well as process and how it can encourage reading in them. And the families get to take a copy of the book with them. And so the Tell Me a Story is really kind of a fun thing too. So what we do for educators and school counselors and helping parents to transition their children is all very important. But the ones that really, I think, just kind of let you see how it impacts the individual children is the student-to-student programs and the Tell Me a Story.
Well, just to affirm what you guys are doing, I know that when we went to the Tell Me a Story, from a parent perspective, it was really powerful. At the community leader that was reading the story for the one that I went to happened to be one of our military leaders and his wife that kind of read the story together. From a parent perspective, I can't tell you how encouraging, again, going to that mentoring, going to having the village surrounding you, your military village even surrounding you, as a parent, just to remind you that it all works out, right? It all works out. And being able to have access to those mentors is just really encouraging when they're able to talk about their family and how their kids are grown and gone, or maybe have their own children and how much they're enjoying reading this book even to their grandkids. And you just get that perspective as a parent that what you're going through in this present circumstance, whether you have toddlers that you feel like, you just feel like all you're doing is laundry and diapers and dishes, right? That there's something outside of today that's coming, and that there's, you will get through this season, and having those mentors there, I think does wonders for your heart in that. But I think from my kids' perspective, that story time was good because they got to look in the room. Now I'm really going to cry, right? But they got to look in the room and they got to see just how many military kids there were. Sometimes, depending on where you're stationed, you go into a school that may not be a DoDEA school, right? It might be a school that has civilian and military kids. And it's easy to look around the lunchroom and feel like you're the only military kid there, or that you moved mid-year and everybody else has moved on and made connections and you just feel alone. And so as our kids got older, I think it was so good for them to walk into a room and feel like they were at home and feel like there was other kids around them that are having the same experience, that they could have those, what seemed like weird conversations of where did you come from, right? And feel like that wasn't an odd question. And so again, if you're listening and maybe you've just moved or you're anticipating a move, there's just so much available to you if you get outside of your house and just log even on the website and see what's available through resources on the website, but also what might be happening at that next installation, or even where you are now that might help with that upcoming transition. There's a lot that's available to them. So I just want to say thank you for taking on this role. I know it's new for you, but you obviously are passionate about it. There's a reason why you were supposed to help with digging into that material to write those opening remarks or closing remarks. I'm so glad that you came across MCEC and that you're now in a place where you can make such a difference for so many families. I think that's one of the greatest joys, is being able to maximize your effort each day and know that you're not just touching one family, you're touching so many at once just by being able to take MCEC to the next level. So Dr. Porter, thank you so much for your time and your energy, for what you're doing, for encouraging so many families, and for leading a staff of people who obviously love others and want what's best for others and want what's best for these kids too. And so I personally, from my military family to you, I just want to say thank you for what you do.
Thanks so much, Corey. It was a pleasure to be here.
Thank you for listening to the Life Giver podcast. If you're enjoying these episodes, please share the podcast with other service couples that may benefit from the show. If you're feeling especially grateful, head on over to patreon.com/lifegiver, or find the link in today's show notes, where for just a couple of dollars, you can help breathe life into more service families. If you'd like more information about me or Life Giver, head on over to CoreyWeathers.com or life-giver.org.